Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dan Lanning, the Oregon Ducks, kicking off spring practice. And every single year, I find it just fascinating to look at this Oregon roster heading into spring ball and say, hey, we got a lot of really talented new faces coming into this program, but we also have a lot of talent already on this football team. Who are the new freshmen that can really carve out a role for Oregon going into the 2025 year? Now, it's not easy to get on the football field for this Oregon program when you're as talented as Oregon is. But when you recruit some really talented football players, chances are we're going to see some freshmen make an impact for Oregon in the 2025 year. Fired up to get into it. We got 6 names to talk about. Before we get into it, as always, the Oregon fans, y'all let it fly in the comment section. Again, when you're dealing with this many talented early enrollee true freshmen that are joining this Oregon program, there's a lot of potential names that really could break out and become difference makers for Oregon in 2025. I know the Oregon fans are pretty in touch with the recruiting trail. Y'all got some names that you are excited for. I'm talking about 6 of them. Would love to hear from y'all in the comments section in terms of names I might be sleeping on. Without further ado, let's get into it. You have to start this conversation with Dakorien Moore. Now, he's a cut above, at least in my opinion. Every single year on the recruiting trail, you kind of identify not only the really good football players, but the special talents. In my opinion, Dakorien Moore is that guy, and he's coming into a wide receiver room that has plenty of talent, but not a ton of proven production, right? You lose Tez Johnson, you lose Trayshawn Holden, 2 of your top pass catchers from last year. Who are the names that could fill the void? I mean, you have a lot of really talented wide receivers on this roster. You make no mistake about it, Dakorien Moore will play a role. Now, how big is that role going to be? We're going to find out over the next couple of weeks and months. But to me, look, I know this is a hot take because you have some really good wideouts on this roster, headlined by Evan Stewart. If you told me that Dakorien Moore led Oregon in receiving yards in 2025, I wouldn't be all that stunned. Now, what makes Dakorien Moore different from a lot of really other talented wide receivers that are freshmen coming into the college level? To me, it's how multidimensional Dakorien Moore is. You look at Dakorien Moore and say there you could put him at the slot, you could put him at the boundary, but more importantly, he can do just about everything you ask of Dakorien Moore. Now, I think the best asset that he's going to bring to Oregon is the verticality. He's not the biggest wide receiver at 5'11", buck 85. He's put together, but he ain't that big. His ball skills in terms of going up and making plays over defensive backs, it's one of, if not the best in the class. And so not only does he have elite ball skills tracking the ball down the field, he also runs a 10-4 in the 100-meter dash, and that lines up from what you've seen from him on the film too. He's going to be the fastest player, or one of the fastest players on this Oregon roster, specifically in the wide receiver room. And that to me is something you want to pull on a little bit, because you look at the step I think a lot of Oregon fans want to see from this offense from 2024 to 2025 is, hey, we want to work the boundary more, and we want to work the deeper third of the field a little bit more. With Dillon Gabriel, that wasn't really his MO. He was a quick release guy that wants to work the quick game and be really short, accurate in the quick game. Didn't have the biggest arm, did not push the football down the field a ton for Oregon in 2024. Well, now you have a guy in Dante Moore who we presume to be the starting quarterback for Oregon. The arm talent's there for Dante Moore. The deeper third is there for him as a thrower of the football. The boundary is there. There's a little bit more things you can ask Dante Moore to do that Dakorien Moore does really well. And again, I think the other thing is what he does after the catch. I mean, not only working vertically, but he's a guy that if you want to give a quick bubble screen to and let him do the rest, he's a guy that can change games with the football in his hands. There are a lot of freshman wide receivers that come into college and they're kind of just one-dimensional, only really good at one or two things. I think Ziyare Branch at USC is probably the best example where, look, Zachariah Branch had elite speed. We all know that, but struggled getting off the line of scrimmage because he was a little bit smaller, did not have elite ball skills tracking the football down the field. He was really only a yards after the catch guy. You had to kind of force your way to involve him in the offense, where Dakorien Moore, he does so many different things well. You can just let him rip from a lot of different ways. Dakorien Moore is going to play a role We just got to find out how big that role is. Now, number 2, Trey McNutt. Now, this is to me a really fascinating conversation, and this should really excite Oregon fans going into 2025. Our biggest talking point in terms of, hey, Oregon, they get closer every single year. How do they get over the hump in the 2025 year? To me, one of the biggest things you have to address is the team speed on the defensive side of the football, specifically from your linebackers and safeties. Go back to guys like Kobe Savage, Tasheem Johnson, shorter, slower safeties. Trey McNutt's a true freshman, but this kid is big, and he looks bigger than 180 pounds from the winter workout pictures I've seen from him at Oregon. Runs a 10.8 in the 100-meter dash. This is the biggest, fastest safety that you have in the room immediately as a true freshman. Now, you take a look at the Oregon depth chart and say it ain't going to be easy to get on the football field, right? Because you have Dylan Tiemann, who is clearly the one starting safety. Kingston Lopa, Peyton Woodyard, Aaron Flowers all going into year 2 that are all very good prospects. And then you have Trey McNutt. Now, what's intriguing about Trey McNutt is I think he's physically gifted enough to get on the football field early for Oregon, but also having a guy like Dylan Tiemann, who has played as much football as he has coming over from Purdue, I think having that veteran safety that is one of the smartest safeties that you see in the country, that can allow you to potentially play a true freshman. Say, hey, you might be still kind of learning on the fly a little bit, but we know you're the athlete that can play. Well, having Dylan Tiemann next to him, I think certainly allows you to maybe play a younger safety at the other spot. Trey McNutt, I don't know if I'm picking him to start immediately for Oregon because you have some really good safeties that are on this roster in Kingston Lopa, Peyton Woodyard, and Aaron Flowers. To me, he's probably the most physically gifted. I think Oregon needed to get bigger, stronger, faster at that safety spot. I think Trey McNutt's going to have a chance to really carve out a role in spring practice. Number 3, Na'eem Offord. And again, very similar to the conversation we had with Trey McNutt. It's not going to be easy to get on the football field as a boundary cornerback. Now, you look at Trey McNutt, very similar, or you look at Na'eem Offord, very similar to Trey McNutt. He is one of the more gifted athletes on this roster immediately coming into Oregon, but in a very similar conversation. All right, who you got to beat out to play at the boundary cornerback spot? You pull up the depth chart. To me, y'all know how I feel about Iffy. I think Iffy could be the cornerback 1 on this football team in the 2025 year. You have Jaleel Florence. You're bringing Theron Johnson. You have Dakota Fields, Siona Lalea. I mean, it's such a loaded cornerback room, and although it's not as experienced as it was in the 2024 year, it's probably more talented. And I think Na'eem Offord's a guy that you can get creative. Hey, maybe he can't play at your 2 boundary cornerback spots because Iffy or Jaleel Florence are too good. Well, maybe he can play as a nickel defender. And even playing the nickel, you got to beat out a guy like Roderick Pleasant or a guy like Jaden Kennedy, who we know can play coming from Ole Miss. It's not going to be easy to get on the football field. It's not going to be easy to get on the football field anywhere for this Oregon roster. But when you have these special talents like Trey McNutt, like Na'eem Offord, they're going to have a chance. And I think the biggest takeaway I have is Oregon is just bigger, stronger, faster in the secondary and on defense in general. You look at how you want to beat a team like Ohio State or how you want to beat a team like Texas in the college football playoffs. These teams, Ohio State, Texas, etc., they got legitimate difference makers on the outside. If you want to stop these offenses, you got to have the physical talent to match up with the Jeremiah Smiths or the guys like Ryan Wingo at Texas. Oregon has brought those guys into the program, and you feel better about it going into 2025. Next on the list, and this is an interesting one, Ziyare Addison. Do I think he starts? No. I think Oregon did enough in the transfer portal with guys like Harkey and Isaiah World to say, hey, it's probably going to be hard to start for Oregon. But one of the question marks we do have about this football team is, all right, what does the depth look like on the offensive line? And you kind of pull up the depth chart and say, all right, Isaiah World, Alex Harkey, we feel good about those being your starting tackles. We feel good about what the inside of the offensive line looks like in terms of the starting 5. But once you get into the 2s and 3s at the tackle position, you're not necessarily sure what you have. You know, Janoris Wilson, Fox Crater, they were blue chip guys that were encouraged about, but you still have question marks about what they're going to be. I think what allows it, and again, kind of our conversation about Ziyare Addison, I freaking love this kid coming out of high school. I think he's going to be a great player for Oregon. The question here in spring practice is, can you find your way into the two deep? I think he could. And I think it starts with his position versatility. You know, he could be a guard, he could be a tackle, he could probably play both of those positions. And now it's, hey, find what position he is going to be best at and see if he can work his way into the two deep. But I think Oregon answering the depth of the offensive line is probably something you want to see play out during spring practice. I'll give you one more name at the wide receiver position that I think is interesting. That's Cooper Perry. I think when you have a Dakorien Moore in your class, you know, ain't nobody going to talk about Cooper Perry. He's been one of the most productive wide receivers across the country over the last couple of years. Here's what fascinates me about Cooper Perry is you're looking to replace wide receivers like Tez Johnson and like Trayshawn Holden, who operated a lot of the times from the slot, worked the middle of the field. Who can do that? Now, Evan Stewart's a boundary wide receiver that wants to work vertically. I think Dakorien Moore can do just about anything you ask of him, but he's another guy that specializes working vertically. All right, who are going to be your possession guys? Am I picking Cooper Perry to get significant playing time as a freshman? No, I'm not, but he is the kind of wide receiver that Oregon is probably looking for, especially in the Will Stein offense. This is a really smooth mover that knows how to create separation, has really, really good route tree, gets off the line of scrimmage at a high level, has really good feel for the position too. Like when you take a look at the high school film, he sees zone coverage. He knows how to tempo his routes. He knows how to sit it down in zone coverage, be presentable to the quarterback. Those are the things that oftentimes prohibit wide receivers from getting on the football field early. I think Cooper Perry is kind of wired that way to play early. Now it's, hey, are you physically ready and gifted enough to crack this wide receiver rotation? I'm not sure if he is, but I did want to take some time to talk about Cooper Perry as a guy that, whether it's this year, whether it's 2026, 2027, I think will be a very good football player for Oregon in the future. Last one is Jordan Davidson. Jordan Davidson is a could potentially bring a unique skill set to the running back room. I mean, he is a big body who's at been times listed at 230 pounds. And that kind of checks out when you turn on that senior year film at Modern Day. He wants to get vertically downhill. Now, you have a couple of intriguing running backs in this room, but do you have a short yardage back like Jordan? I don't know. And again, you talk about Oregon getting over the hump. It's half of percentages. You know, it's 1%. It's a half a percent. Hey, can we win certain plays that allow us to win the football game? Short yardage, 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, moving the chains, extending drives. Can Jordan Davidson, with that big physical back that wants to attack the line of scrimmage, can he be your short yardage back in the 2025 season? You'd have to put a lot of trust into the true freshman, but I do think he's probably the biggest and most physical running back on this roster, even as a true freshman. Is he the best running back? I probably not. You know, Mekhi Hughes is a guy I really like, but I do think he brings a skill set that I think could be intriguing for Oregon in 2025. And again, at the end of the day, you brought in a lot of really talented freshmen, but they're coming into a roster that's really, really deep and talented. So it's going to be hard for some of these freshmen to find the football field. But when you bring in the amount of talent that Oregon has brought in, I don't think it's crazy to see some of these freshmen during spring practice really carve out a role for this Oregon football team. We will sign out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.